Most people imagine the death of Robert-François Damiens as a simple public execution, a quick moment in the town square. But contemporary records describe something far more disturbing. When the red-hot pincers first touched his skin, the flesh did not just burn. It lifted, tightened, and then opened like soft wax pushed by a knife. Muscles jumped on their own, twisting under the surface like trapped worms, while small drops of liquefied fat slid down his ribs and hissed on the cold platform below. While popular accounts suggest he was merely drawn and quartered, the reality was an organized dismantling of a living human body, carried out step by step. Enlightenment. France liked to call itself civilized, yet on 28 March 1757, its justice system behaved more like a machine built to crush bone, break will, and display fear in front of a crowd, hungry for order. To humanize him is uncomfortable, but necessary. Damiens trembled, half-conscious, teeth chattering in the freezing air, whispering for water as surgeons stood nearby holding boiling oil, waiting for their turn. To understand why France chose its most medieval cruelty for a single servant, we must first understand who Damiens truly was. Before he became the victim of the most brutal execution in French history, Robert-François Damiens was simply a man shaped by hardship. Born into poverty in 1715, he drifted through life as a servant, dismissed from one household after another, often for minor mistakes or sudden outbursts linked to unstable moods. Witnesses described him not as violent, but as a troubled, frustrated man who spoke too much and dreamed too little. His life was marked more by misfortune than malice. The event that sealed his fate came on 5 January 1757, when he scratched King Louis XV with a small knife outside the palace at Versailles. The wound was shallow, barely breaking the skin, but in a monarchy that believed the king's body was sacred, even a scratch was treated like a cosmic insult. While popular stories reduce the incident to an assassination attempt, contemporary records show the truth. The attack was impulsive, confused, and politically meaningless. Yet the royal court chose to read it as a threat to the entire state. To understand why, we must look at France in 1757. The nation was drowning in corruption scandals, religious conflict, and public distrust. The monarchy feared losing control. A poor servant harming the king, even slightly, exposed the fragility of royal authority. Damiens became the symbol of every hidden fear the crown refused to admit. But the king's physical safety was not the real issue. The crown feared what Damiens represented, a servant daring to touch a sacred body, a crime they believed required punishment beyond imagination. Once Damiens was in custody, the state moved with cold precision. The Parlement of Paris, eager to prove its loyalty to a king who already distrusted it, seized the case immediately. Historical documents show that the trial was never about evidence or motive. It was about symbolism. By charging Damiens under the ancient category of parricide, the crime of killing one's own father, the court legally transformed his small wound into an attack on the father of the nation. This single decision unlocked France's harshest and most theatrical punishment. Public messaging followed the same pattern of exaggeration. Pamphlets quickly circulated across Paris, portraying Damiens as a monster driven by secret plots, even though investigators found no network, no co-conspirators, not even a clear plan. Still, the crown encouraged the stories. They needed citizens to believe that the king had narrowly escaped a grand threat, not a confused man acting alone in desperation. Fear spread easily in a society already shaken by religious conflict and political unrest. Crowds whispered that enemies surrounded the throne. Priests preached about divine protection. And as public anxiety grew, the monarchy used it to justify a punishment designed to both terrify and reassure. A punishment so extreme that it would declare the king's body inviolable and eternal. The machinery of destruction was now fully in motion. But the psychological torment that came before the execution reveals an even deeper cruelty, one designed to break Damiens long before any blade touched him. Before Damiens ever reached the scaffold, the state made sure his mind was already collapsing. For months, he was kept in a small stone cell inside the conciergerie, chained from neck to ankles so tightly that every movement left marks on his skin. Guards never left him alone. The lights were never fully turned off. Silence was replaced by constant footsteps, whispered orders, and the scraping of keys, a method historians now recognize as deliberate sensory pressure meant to dissolve a prisoner's sense of time. Interrogators demanded names he could not give, insisting he confess to conspiracies that did not exist. Each session pushed him deeper into confusion. Witnesses described him staring at the floor for long periods, murmuring to himself, showing classic signs of delirium caused by sleep disruption and extreme fear. The humiliation spread beyond the prison walls. On the rare occasions he was moved, authorities paraded him through the streets in a small wooden cage. People shouted insults, threw mud, and pressed close just to see the face of the man who had touched the king. This public shaming was not an accident. It was a final message that he no longer belonged to himself. By the time Damiens reached the execution ground, the state had already taken everything except his heartbeat. At the scaffold, on 28 March 1757, the truth of what the state intended became impossible to ignore. The executioners stepped forward with iron pincers heated until they glowed a deep orange, the metal humming with stored heat. When the first pair closed on Damiens's chest, witnesses reported a sharp crackle as the skin tightened, split and curled away. The exposed flesh darkened instantly. Nerve endings fired without rhythm, making his arms twitch as if a current had passed through him. While popular history claims this stage was brief, contemporary accounts reveal it lasted long enough for multiple areas of skin to blister, tear, and collapse into wet, shining wounds. Then came the boiling mixture prepared by court surgeons, wax, oil, and molten resin, heated until bubbles rose to the surface like tiny, angry eyes. When poured into the open wounds, the liquid sealed nothing. Instead, it deepened the injury, spreading inward along soft tissue. Historical records describe the smell, a mix of burnt hair, hot fat, and rising steam that drifted across the square. The shock to his system was immediate. His breathing turned shallow, his skin shifted between red and pale, signs of vascular collapse that modern medicine recognizes as the body's desperate attempt to survive overwhelming trauma. The final stage, the attempted quartering, became the part historians struggled to describe without hesitation. 4 horses were tied to his limbs, each pulled by experienced handlers. Yet the human body does not break cleanly. The horses strained, hooves scraping the ground, muscles trembling under the weight of the task. Damiens' body stretched slowly, unbearably, the tendons resisting like thick ropes soaked in water. Witnesses wrote that his cries were no longer words, only raw sound torn from a throat swollen from earlier screaming. When the horses failed, surgeons stepped forward with knives to cut the major tendons, forcing the body to give way. Only then did the limbs separate, one by one in movements described as sickeningly slow. While myths later softened the event, contemporary witnesses admitted the suffering lasted far longer than anyone expected, and when the last limb finally tore free, the horror did not end. The aftermath revealed the true purpose of this spectacle, not justice, but a desperate attempt by the monarchy to project strength through the destruction of a single broken man. It exposed a kingdom terrified of its own collapsing power. When Damiens' final screams faded, the state moved quickly to erase every trace of what had just happened. His torn limbs, still warm from the struggle, were thrown into a large fire built beside the scaffold. The rest of his body followed. Witnesses saw court officers stirring the flames to make sure no piece survived. By scattering his ashes outside the city walls, officials attempted a symbolic erasure, as if destroying his body could also destroy the memory of their own cruelty. Within days, the Crown released official statements describing the execution as orderly and necessary. These reports made no mention of the failed quartering. the panicked surgeons, or the long, chaotic struggle that horrified many in the crowd. Instead, pamphlets insisted the punishment was a clean act of justice, carried out by a confident monarchy. But private letters from nobles tell a different story. Some wrote of nightmares, others of deep shame. Even members of the court admitted the brutality exposed something rotten at the heart of royal power. In the long term, Damiens' death produced an effect the monarchy never expected. Instead of inspiring obedience, it sparked quiet disgust. Many citizens began to see the king not as a father, but as a ruler willing to destroy a man to protect his pride. And that silent shift in public feeling became one of the earliest cracks in a system already beginning to break. In the years that followed, Damiens' name refused to disappear. Enlightenment writers such as Voltaire and Diderot quietly pointed to his execution as proof that the French state, despite its proud claims of progress, still relied on medieval cruelty to preserve its authority. His death became a symbol used in philosophical debates about justice, punishment, and the danger of absolute power. What the crown meant as a display of strength slowly turned into evidence of its own moral collapse. History delivered its own form of justice. Just 32 years later, the same monarchy that tore Damiens apart found itself facing the same scaffold. The French Revolution toppled the system that had punished him so treacherously, showing that violence used to silence fear only delays a fall. It never prevents it. Modern psychology helps explain why torture is not a tool of strong governance. It is a sign of insecurity, a desperate attempt to control through terror when legitimacy is already slipping away. Damiens may not have been a hero, but he was a man destroyed by a state terrified of its own weakness. His story warns us that when a nation crushes a single life to prove its stability, it reveals how unstable it truly is. And history, no matter how carefully rewritten, always brings the truth back into the light.